the EBX25, also known in China as the 元道王, the king of NiceHCK. But it's not actually the star of today's video. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of the original EBX25. Its bass performance feels a bit too weak. But there's someone who absolutely loves this thing. And yes, that person is the Hideo Kojima. He posted photo of it on Twitter every now and then, which naturally makes a lot of people curious about how they actually sound. Later on, NiceHCK managed to get in touch with the Hideo Kojima, and they ended up making a collaboration version, which is exactly today's main character, the Hideo Kojima and NiceHCK collaboration edition. So let's talk about what is actually different between the collab version and the original EBX25Ti. The collab version switches to a titanium color shell with a blue anodized Ludens logo on the outer shell. The plug is also finished in titanium color, and the branding has been changed from the NiceHCK to Kojima's production. Objective sound-wise, as usual, let's start with the curve analysis. These 8 curves you are seeing are all measured off the collab EXP25Ti. And why 8? Well, as you may know, with flathead earbuds, the sound changes depending on whether you use foam or not, whether thin foams or thick foams, and how deep the insertion is. This curve with the strongest bass response was measured with the earbuds pushed very deep into the coupler. But in reality, human ears aren't as soft as silicone one on the artificial ear, so you can't actually achieve that kind of insertion depth. So that curve is more of a reference, just to show the best possible bass performance under ideal conditions. These 2 curves are with foam tips under normal wearing condition. These 2 are with silicone tips, and these last ones are with no foams at all, which obviously caused the bass to leak completely. Given how many times I measured this thing, kindly drop a like for the effort, will ya? I mostly use foam tips, so the analysis from here on will be based on the foam tip measurement. And honestly, I think the sound with foams is the most normal out of all the tips. Foam help tame the EXP25Ti's otherwise extreme treble bias signature, since foam is a porous material, and high-frequency waves have short wavelengths and low energy. They get absorbed very easy, so foams naturally take the edge off their overly bright top end. Looking at the graph, the bass is almost completely gone. From about 20Hz to 300Hz, the entire bass region sits outside the pop average preference bound. That means sub-bass, depths, and impacts are all on the weaker side. Part of this is tuning, of course, but the structure of flatheads also make bass leakage very easy, which exaggerates low and roll off during the measurement. The low mids and mids stick nicely inside the preference target, but the upper mid and treble region gets interesting. Like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't follow the usual 3000Hz peak that most IEM have. Instead, 3000 is a dip, thus forming peaks at 2,500 and 5000 before and after 3000Hz. And what does this mean? Vocal and many instruments get pushed a little bit more forward because of the 2,500 lift. But since 3000 dips, the mid-range energy gets particularly pushed back, so it doesn't get too shouty or close. It makes overall tone and mid-range feel a bit softer. Then at 5000, the energy comes back again, which reinforces sibilance, impact sound, and metallic instruments. Overall, because the entire upper mid to treble range is elevated while bass region is rather weak, it sounds very top-heavy generally. Brighter, lighter, and focused heavily on the upper registers. Looking at the impedance curve, the rated impedance at 1000Hz is around 22 ohms, and the average sitting close to 30 ohms. The highest point appears in the upper treble, beyond 12,000Hz, gradually rising to about 35 ohms. Across the entire frequency range, the impedance only shifts between 30 and 35 ohms, which is a very small variation, roughly 6%. There are no sudden jumps, no sharp drop, and no high Q resonance spikes anywhere in the curve. So even if your source has a higher output impedance, the frequency response won't shift much at all. In simple terms, this thing is not sensitive to source output impedance. Phase-wise, it starts at around 96 degrees at 20Hz and gradually drops until it reaches 0 degree at around 2000Hz. There's group delay across the bass to low mid region, but since the transition is smooth, the audible result still feels fairly natural. From 2000 to 9000 Hz, the phase begins to drop faster and eventually hits a 180-degree phase flip around 8,700 Hz. And this is basically the limitation of using a single dynamic driver to cover the entire frequency bands. At low frequency, the diaphragm behaves like a drumhead, moving in a clean piston-like motion where the whole surface moves together. But as the frequency gets higher and higher, the diaphragm can't keep up as one unified surface anymore. The center might move more, while the edges move less, and the membrane stops behaving uniformly. And then the vibration becomes less coherent, which is why you see phase flips in the high treble here. Next will be the subjective impressions. Let me start with something a bit abstract. Not sure if everyone will get what I mean. The overall tuning of the Collab EXP25Ti feels very upper mid centric. It's like the entire sound is being pushed forward. You just keep pushing it. Push until eventually the whole tonal balance shifts higher. The bass starts sounding like the mid starts sounding like the treble, and everything just ends up sitting in the upper mid, or to say the treble region. That's roughly the feeling. Back to the less abstract description. The bass quantity is still on the lighter side, like the original EXP25Ti, though a touch more than the original EBX25Ti in quantity. Impact is very light, but the sub-bass extension and rebound are surprisingly decent. Without foams, the bass becomes extremely weak, and because the low end collapses, the mids also feel hollow. So, definitely use foams. Vocals are slightly thin, making thinner sounds a bit younger, and the presentation overall feels light and breezy. The vocal image sits a little forward, clear but without sharp edges. The transitions are smooth and the note outlines aren't too strong. Upper mids and treble extend smoothly with no grain, and the high treble actually reaches surprisingly far. This whole area becomes the main character of the song, bright, airy, and occupying most of this stage. The good news is that the brightness isn't aggressive. It's smooth enough that it doesn't feel piercing or fatiguing. In terms of stage, the horizontal width is just quite good, with enough spacing between the instrument to feel open, but the vertical depth is fairly mediocre. So, in summary, the Collab EBX25Ti and the original one doesn't differ much. You get slightly more bass on the Collab version, and beyond that, the overall tuning is basically the same. Its tuning direction, or rather, its mid-treble centric nature is very obvious. The sound is clean, technical, and straightforward. So, if you are into thick, warm, lush tuning, yeah, this one isn't it. The EBX25Ti works best with string, classical, and traditional instruments. Anything that relies on upper mid and treble articulation. For bass-heavy electronic music, well, you sing the bass curve and you can guess what's the ending. It's also somewhat picky about the sources. If your source has a cold or harsh treble tonality, the EBX25Ti will sound even thinner and sharper. So if you want to follow low end, first use foam, and ideally pair it with a warm source, something with good mid bass and lower mid body. Comparing to other flatheads, here I'll compare it with the Aful Polarnight and the Temperament DM7. Before we even start, I have to say this. These three have huge price differences. If we go by the Collab EBX25's price, one of these is basically equal to 3 Polarnights. So, I'm not here to say which one is better or which one crushes the other. That would be unfair and pointless. I'm just talking about how they sound, as someone has commented that he's curious about how they sound in my last video. Alright, first, I really love Polarnight's design. It's not structurally complicated, but that rear panel looks genuinely beautiful. In terms of sound, the Polarnight is basically the opposite of the EBX25Ti. Where the EBX25Ti is upper mid focused, the Polarnight is lower mid and bass focused. More specifically, it has a lot of bass and the bass is somewhat loose, which creates a very atmospheric, relaxed and warm overall tuning. Combining warm, full low end and relaxed staging, you get a tuning that works well for pop, It pairs nicely with EDM2, reinforcing the beats and driving drums with a good presence. But once you have moved past the meat, things start falling apart a bit. Vocal can sound a little strange occasionally, almost like the singer has a cold with a heavy nasal tone. And the treble extension isn't great. When the music hits high notes, you can feel it stop short, like it could and should keep going up, but just doesn't. The DM7 also has a pretty nice design, a full metal shell, but surprisingly lightweight. Its tuning follows a direction similar to the EBX25Ti, a very light, bright, upper-mid-centric vocal presentation. The whole sound leans toward the upper registers, but it has one interesting trait that's different from the collab EBX25Ti. I actually think the DM7 sounds better without the foam tips. Its bass presence is slightly stronger than the EBX25Ti, so even when the lower end leaks a bit, it still maintains enough body to hold its shape. And without foams, the DM7's tonal direction becomes more clear and more intentional. You can actually know what it is trying to present. But once you add foams, yeah, there's more bass in quantity and more punches. But it makes the bass sit in a rather awkward middle ground. Not enough to be satisfying, but also not clearly biased enough to make it sound treble focused like it should be. It ends up sounding a bit messy, kind of like how the Moondrop Line 2 pop version. So honestly, I prefer drowning it beer, although it would sacrifice the bass quantity. Overall, the bass is still quite weak, just similar to the EBX25Ti. Vocals sit at a moderate distance, not too close and not too far, but they are very bright, so your attention naturally gravitates to them. The entire mid-range is on the thinner side. Treble is also bright with good extension and a very clean and transparent texture. But if your source doesn't have good treble control, the DM7 can get sharp very quickly. Just like the EBX25Ti, it has low mid-range density, weak bass and very bright upper mids and treble, so it only works well with specific genres. The overall tuning direction is quite similar to the collab EBX25Ti, but to be honest, the DM7 feels like a more straightforward and more plain water version of EBX25Ti, basically a lower tier substitute for the Kojima collab.